Bon, alors là, on a les 5 minutes de décalage habituel. D'ailleurs, c'est marrant parce que le flux de remplissage de la salle est plutôt à 11h02. Voilà, c'est la dernière fois que je pense que je fais cette toute petite introduction. Il va y avoir une nouvelle équipe pour le séminaire du labo. Je remercie Anna et Nada qui ont fait que le séminaire sera d'ailleurs fait penser enregistré et en hybride. Et voilà, donc aujourd'hui, c'est une journée complètement historique à deux titres. D'abord parce que c'est une révolution quand même. Il y a un historien qui vient au LSCE qui va faire ce séminaire qui est Emmanuel Garnier, que moi je connais depuis très longtemps, mais avec qui j'ai pu interagir aussi depuis très longtemps. Donc je laisserai Pascal parler d'Emmanuel. Et puis la dernière chose que je veux dire, c'est pourquoi historique à deux niveaux. C'est parce que aussi ce soir, il y a une expo qui était un gros travail sur la présence française en Antarctique et donc voilà, ça fait deux raisons pour lesquelles aujourd'hui c'est une journée historique pour le labo. Et sur ce, j'ai assez parlé. Je laisse Pascal dire quelques mots d'introduction à Emmanuel.
Merci Gilles. Valérie n'est pas là.
Non,
Bien,
il n'est pas.
donc on va commencer avec un peu de retard. Alors, je ne vais pas parler très longtemps. Alors, je connais Emmanuel depuis très longtemps, une petite vingtaine d'années. À l'époque, Emmanuel était maître de conférence à l'université de Caen. C'est un disciple d'Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie, le grand historien français. Et nous avons beaucoup travaillé dans le cadre d'un projet d'ANR que je coordonnais à l'époque. C'était la première vague des projets d'ANR. On a commencé à faire pas mal de choses. Alors, il y avait Nicolas Dioli, Valérie Héo, Emmanuel Laurent. Et donc, Emmanuel, voilà. J'ai essayé de rester en vie. Donc, Emmanuel nous a rejoints, et puis après, il y a eu un autre projet d'ANR qui a fait pas mal de choses intéressantes. Il y avait Balkanski dedans, donc on a simulé des éruptions de Balti, par exemple. Donc ça, c'était très intéressant. Et puis, entre-temps, Emmanuel a roulé sa bosse, il est rentré au CNRS, il a travaillé à La Rochelle, puis à Besançon. Euh, Japon à plusieurs reprises. Et puis maintenant, il va poser ses valises au LSCE. Et donc, nous aurons le plaisir de le voir plus longtemps maintenant. Et voilà, ce séminaire va nous présenter son activité récente et ses projets pour les prochaines années.
Eh ben,
Je te laisse la
merci,
parole.
Pascal. Quelle est la meilleure solution? Parler français? Les diapositives? Or do you prefer to speak English or French one? Yeah, so it's better to speak English. Okay, so I'll do my best. Okay, merci. Well, thank you very much for coming. Couldn't imagine such a turnout. I'm very impressed. So thank you again. And well, when Gilles proposed me to give a presentation, I was, of course, enthusiastic and very excited. But actually, I was a bit embarrassed as well. Why? Just because the presence of an historian in such a lab, the LSCE, especially dedicated to hard sciences and so on, climate, and was not that obvious actually. So I was wondering, we have some chat about the content of my presentation, and we decided to offer you a kind of landscape of my ecosystem. I mean, my material, my ways of working, yes, working with colleagues from other disciplines, mostly climatologists, geologists, and so on. So, no? So I thought it could be useful to give you a presentation that could give you some idea in terms of potential opportunities. Firstly, I would talk about a monument for historians. This monument is the book of a great historian, French historian, Marc Bloch, who was actually a great scientist and a great patriot. Indeed, he fought in the French resistance. He died because of it and because he was a Jew as well. And Marc Bloch defined the job of historian and published a book titled Le Métier d'historien. Second maybe question, why did I use in my title the term of multidisciplinarity and not transdisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity? Actually, it's because of my experience with Pascal, with Nicolas Biovi, Yves Balkanski, and so on. Actually, it's best adapted methods to me for now, 20 years, yes, 20 years at least. It's indeed my scientific practice since the beginning of my career with other disciplines in the science of the universe and the environment. Indeed, I'm used to work with ecologists as well. And multidisciplinarity actually brings together different disciplines around a common subject, a volcano, climatic disaster, and so on. And multidisciplinarity therefore connects discipline without obligations. That's very important if you want to make a sustainable dialogue, I would say, between different disciplines. So connect discipline without obligation in order to achieve the same objective. My early openness to multidisciplinarity has quickly oriented me towards a certain number of scientific concerns that the keywords below summarize. Just a few seconds for the keywords. And the second part, yes, very hard actually, yes. When you choose to work in a multidisciplinarity way, you have to face many issues. The first one is more or less physical. You have to be very flexible and versatile. That's why I used to say that we, multidisciplinarity, multidisciplinary scholars, we are used to live with Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. Why? Because we have to answer different expectations. The first one, in my case, an historian, is to meet the expectation of what maybe you call, I don't know, the soft science, famous science molle, which is very pejorative, or more officially, the human and social sciences. By the way, maybe you remember the great Pierre-Simon Laplace considered that social sciences were hard sciences. Maybe you didn't know that, but yes, it's what he claimed for a long time, actually. And that's why I'm affiliated to the CNRS Institute called INSHS, Institut National des Sciences Humaines et Sociales. Thank you very much. And it's very hard to remember. And I've been trained as an historian. I've got an agrégation d'histoire and a PhD in environment history. And every day when I work in the LSCE or away, I have to meet this famous expectation of my discipline, which are an approach. I have to base my approach on sources. It's very important, textual or printed, iconography, and so on. I have to respect what we call the sources criticism. We have to report past events, categorize them, then propose an interpretation justified by the sources. That's really the historian way defined by Marc Bloch in his famous book, Le Métier d'historien. And I have to meet the expectation of hard sciences as well. What do they expect is hard sciences, sciences dures? By hard sciences, I'm talking about climatologists, geologists, sedimentologists, sometimes doctors. I used to work in Africa with African or European doctors. Actually, they usually consider, but maybe I know, no? But they usually consider that the soft sciences are less subjective. Hard sciences are less subjective than SHS because they are based on numbers. And indeed, we just have a few numbers until the 18th or 19th century. So it's sometimes a bit hard to my colleagues, yes, to present data made of words. Yes, the debate on mathematical formalization, laws, they say, describing phenomena from cause to consequence. Well, in brief, I have to answer a double requirement for studying environmental phenomena of the past. Okay. Actually, such a way is a risky journey for the researcher. Why? Because actually, we have to live with a second syndrome. Well, the syndrome I call the syndrome of the importer. I explain. Actually, for my fellow historian, sometimes I'm no longer really an historian, because I collaborate with climatologists, with geologists, and I try to adapt my methods, my data, and it's not very popular in our discipline, not at all, actually. And for you, we are not true scientists either. So for my discipline, it's a kind of betrayal, and we can see it when we are evaluated during the assessments by the CNRS or the university committees and so on. Why? Because actually I'm part of the CNRS, I'm affiliated to the INSHS. Earlier I was part of the CID 52, devoted to interdisciplinarity. But actually the CID 52 has just an indicative role in my career. They say, yes, it's a good work, very interesting, you work with geologists, climatologists, but it didn't help me when I tried to be promoted, for example. So I depend on another section, a strong one, made of pure historian, the section 35, called officially Modern and Contemporary Worlds. And actually, they are really very, very historians. So they are often very puzzled, yes, by my work in collaboration with the hard science scientists. So it's quite an issue, not anymore. I'm a whole man, a whole scholar, it's okay. But for my student, PhD student, postdoc student, it's quite a challenge, believe me. Why? For the same reasons. Well, they did a kind of historical PhD, but it's not really an historical work and so on. And when they try to apply for the university or the CNIS, it's very complicated. Actually, most of my students, they get a job in private companies, because I'm used to work with insurers or reinsurers, it depends. And they are very interested in such profiles. Yes, it's surprising, but it's a good news for them. Another example, currently I have a PhD student, she wants to prepare a PhD. And since my arrival here, I don't know where she can enroll. I mean, she can't enroll in the, it seems to be the case, she can't enroll in the école doctorale of the LSCE. So I don't know what to do. It's time to enroll. I contacted my historian's colleague from the USVQ. It seems to be very complicated because I come from the LSCE. So, yeah, a bit divided. Yes, it comes. Don't know what to do with me and my student. Okay, and there are many other things which really upset my historian colleagues. An example, amongst many others, the editorial formatting of our papers. A normal historian has to publish books, to publish chapters, not too many articles. And if he published article, here is the good way, the left one. If you compare with the hard science way, it's quite different. So really a kind of schizophrenia when we publish, when we write, and so on. I never know what kind of footnotes I have to use and my students, depending on the supervisor and the committee. Yeah. So as I said, it's a risky journey. Okay. Yeah. Well, but there are some good things in this choice of multidisciplinarity. The first one is because I have the honor and the honor to meet Emmanuel Garnier. Emmanuel Garnier, and Pascal told you about him. He's a great, great French historian, member of the historical École des Annales, French École des Annales, and the inventor of climate history. He is world known, Emmanuel Garnier. Sadly, he died in 2023, and actually, he gave me many opportunities. And the most important one was to meet the team of the Ophélie ANR project led by Pascal, and then to take part in another ANR, Chitra. And then thanks probably to Emmanuel, to the ANR with the LSCE team, I got a chair in the EUF. Maybe you know the EUF. It's a very interesting ecosystem. We have money, we have time, and so on. And from the EUF, I had the opportunity to be invited by several foreign universities or labs. First of all, I would like to talk to you about my material. You will be very surprised, actually. We use very hot things, actually. Maybe some of them have made some historical studies. No, maybe not. No. Bon. Anyway, we use what I call a very sustainable and resilient material made of parchment or later of white paper. So you can study, for example, a flood occurred in the 12th century easily because the description was written on a parchment. Could you say the same with a digitalized material? I'm not quite sure. We can do that. That said, actually, in the middle of the 19th century, they decided because of the French, of the Industrial Revolution, they used more chemicals in the paper. So they made a new kind of paper, and this paper is very, very, very fragile. And you can have an idea of my damage in the archive center in La Réunion. It was about cyclones and so on. And we contribute to damage some documents sometimes because of the quality of the material. You can see here. What kind of materials we use? Actually, it can be divided between more or less three sources. The first one, very important, is what we call historian rural history. What provide rural history, mostly phenology data about great powers, for example. It's what we use and studied for the ANR Ophélie, and in the last extent for the ANR Cheddar. The second one, very interesting, is I put it in a box named Culture, Mentalities, and Sciences. So you can see we have religious data documents, we have legal documents. I'll explain. Scientific archive and press. And the third one, the most important to me, is the administrative archives. By the way, yes, what can we collect in our material? Actually, we collect social signatures of past events. That's very important. I mean, if a disaster doesn't cause, for example, demographic, social, economic impact, we can't, these archives, they don't record the event. Okay? We need a social signature if we want to get some archives, some data. So the first one, used to call the Lagrangian classics, are made of phenological data, mostly made of grape harvest date, wheat harvest date, olive harvest date. You can find many documents about these harvests everywhere in Europe, in the US, in Canada as well, in Western world, if you prefer. But you find the same in Japan. I used to work in Japan. I find the same kind of documents, but about what? Not wheat, not rice, but about rice, of course. Dating from the 12th century sometimes. It's amazing what we can find in Asian archives. And we use it to assess the fluctuation of climate. But there is a weak side, I would say, as an historian. It's the fact that it's a kind of over-evaluation of what I call the good weather. I mean, the sequence, the temporal sequence between roughly April to August. So we can't rebuild past climate for winter sometimes. It's very complicated. So here are some examples I don't want to talk too much about because we are running out of time. Yes, it's very challenging for an historian to talk quickly, to talk a lot. Well, the first one is what I used to call to my students the voice of the Lord. And there are many voices coming from the Lord in terms of history. The first one, probably the most relevant one, are parish registers. We use them for cheddar. What can we find in a parish register? Actually, it's an example from Cambridge parish. And actually, it's very interesting if you want to assess the social demographic impact of a disaster, climate disaster, geological disaster, because they provide a lot of data. I mean, the name of the deceased, the age, the gender, and often the professional activity of the deceased. That way, we can assess the impact of a disaster. And it's what we did for Cheddar about the volcano, Laki volcano in Iceland in 1783. That way, by using German, English, French, parish registers, we could rebuild actually the victims, how many victims died because of the volcano, and actually we used it to follow, particularly here, use them to follow the fall of the Laki by using then a model and so on, and it did great actually. Another kind of information provided by parish registers, sometimes some priests or pastors, Protestant vicars, if you prefer, are so traumatized by a disaster that they describe in detail the event. It's what did my Catholic German priest in Münster about a hurricane occurred in January 1739. We use a lot of dates. I'm sorry, it's typically historian. Huh? Yeah. All the kind of voice of the Lord, the meteorological possession. It's very popular among climate historians everywhere in Europe, actually. The inventor would be, I would say, my fellow colleague Mariano Barrientos from Spain, from Barcelona University. What is a precession? Well, in the past until the 19th century, but actually we still use it. You have a Russian Orthodox example here, a French one in 2008. Actually, when past societies faced a disaster, such a flood, such a drought, they were used to ask God, depends, the Virgin or saints, for something, for stopping the disaster. It's what you can see on this engraving about the great European drought of 1694, when they decided to organize a procession by imploring Saint Geneviève, who is, as you know or not, the protector of Paris. It's what you can see here. Another example, Spanish. Yeah, from the Cathedral of Salamanca. And it's the same, actually, the same scenario. It's about drought. So they ask who the elite people, they ask to the church to organize a procession for obtaining rain, serenité, good weather, and so on. And actually, we have two kinds of procession. The pro-pluvia procession for rain, and the pro-serenitate, it's Latin word, of course, for a good weather. So we use it, the second one, in case of flood, in case of cold, and so on. But it's very important, actually. It's about 30–40% in processions registers. So meteorology is quite an issue for past societies. One of the last voices of the Lord, the ex voto, it's interesting because you can find them everywhere in the Catholic world. I mean, in Europe, in Canada, in South America, Africa, and Asia, because you have to keep in mind that the first European missionaries, Jesuits mostly, settled in China, Korea, and Japan in the 16th century. So they organize parishes, churches, and they provide the same documents about China. That's why I regularly work with Chinese colleagues, because they need this kind of documents. You have an Italian ex voto about a storm. The other one is about the flooding of Camargue in the middle of the 19th century. More unexpected. There is an archive, a document, kept in the archives of La Comédie Française. Do you know the Comédie Française? It's the French theater company, better known as the Français, La Comédie Française. And it's totally amazing. Thanks to the US colleagues, they wanted to study the content of this kind of documents. So they proposed me to take part in a project for 4 or 5 years, actually. And I was specialized, of course, in the climate past events recorded in the archives of the Comédie Française. What kind of event? And actually, they record every single play since the middle of the 7th century. And regularly, because of the Little Ice Age, they were used to what? To cancel some plays because it was unable to see it. Because of what? Here is a good example. Because here of a heat wave in 1718, it was a very tough sequence in terms of climatology. It's a kind of chapelet, I would say, of very hot summers. So I don't insist. Yeah. And finally, the famous administrative archives provided by the bureaucracy. You know, everyone denounces the weight of the bureaucracy nowadays. But actually, an historian do love bureaucracy. Without bureaucracy, we have no archives. It's very important. And I do love the French bureaucracy, the oldest one, the most powerful. Yes, indeed. England is a bit, it's lighter in England, much more light. They are talking about everything. The first one comes from the city government of Geneva. The second one from individuals who are in charge of the farming of the fence in East Anglia. And they came about the drought in 1785. It was a European drought again. And the last one, much older, in Lyon, at the end of the medieval period, and it's a taxpayer register. And in the taxpayer register, they say, it's a disaster, disaster. They are all dying, the taxpayers. And it's what say there. It's very funny. Yes, we really enjoy our documents, we historians. Yeah. And then we have some ego documents. Ego documents, it's English terms, means private documents used for describing the daily life and so on. But in the 18th century, their households, everywhere in Europe, are used to provide a lot of information about natural disasters. And I have a kind of tour in terms of content, the diary of the aristocrat Thomas Barter, provided by the Met Office. It's amazing. For about 50 years, he records instrumental data and provide textual information about the weather. It's really amazing. We have the same in Paris with a bookseller for the same period. Yes, below you have, it's interesting, the same un livre de raison, we say, an ego document, written by what a wealthy farmer, Catalan one, and is describing an aigua. Do you know what is an aigua? In Catalan countries, it scares the Catalan people. No? It's a flash flood, actually. It's very common. It's very disastrous for centuries in this part of Europe, and he's describing the events. The other one is a wealthy merchant from La Rochelle. Actually, he has a German origin from Bremen, and he's describing every day the weather and provides, again, methodological information. And the last one, a beautiful thing, actually, is a diary of the Lord of Sendai, of the kind of dukedom, we would say, it's daimyo in Japanese. And he's talking about of one of the most tsunami of the last 400 years, occurred in 1611. We used it with my colleagues from Sendai and Kyoto University, mostly they were geologists, seismologists and so on, for building and modeling this event, and in order to compare it with the last one of 2011 in Tohoku province. I told you, that's really amazing what we can find in papers. And the last days, I would say, are made of press documents. It's very common. It's connected to what? To the progress of science everywhere in Europe, with different newspapers providing documents, description of extreme events. Maybe. Yeah. Indeed, the 18th century, yes, the 18th century is, as you know, maybe the famous age of philosophers of enlightenment. And actually, these philosophers favored the creation of many scientific societies. I would name the Royal Society of London, the German society called Societas Meteorologica Palatina, the French societies, many of them. The most important was the Royal Society of Medicine. The second one, maybe you know it better, is the National Society of Science of Paris. They use the instruments of the observatory, and regularly they published data and information about meteorological conditions. So it's what we use for the Cheddar ANR project, for example. massively this kind of data. Sorry. So what do we do with such data then? Actually, we build database. I learned how to build database thanks to my colleagues of the LSCE by working with them within the ANR, Ophélie, and CHEDA. And a few years ago, 5, 6 years, the French Ministry of Ecology said it could be interesting. So they funded an official database called Historisk. And we are currently trying to repatriate this database from Besançon to the LSCE, thanks to the help of Dorothée and Bruno. Sorry?
Julien.
So sorry. Julien. I don't know why, Bruno. Yeah. So with the database, with this data, historical data, we can rebuild some historical scenario, I would say. Here is an example about drought, a great one, European again, in 1578. What did we use? As you can see, we use private documents, diaries, from a farmer in Ile-de-France. Then we use the processions, because the procession begin with the beginning of the natural disaster. And when it's over, they organize a last procession for thanking God. So we know, we have an idea of the duration of an extreme event, for example. So it's what we can do. We did that for a European project a few years ago. We built some scales in terms of intensity and duration. Another example, a bit odd. It was, well, we did it with Chinese colleagues from Kunming and Beijing University. They wanted to rebuild historical in Yunnan. But they faced an issue. They didn't have documents. And it was before the invention of the seismograph, of course. So they asked me, as a French scholar, to have a look in the French archives. And what did I find? A missionary, okay, who settled in Yunnan in the 19th century and recorded every day some information about natural events. Actually, these French missionaries of the 19th century, they were strong Catholics, huh? But actually they were as kind of subcontractors for the colleagues of the Museum d'Histoire Naturelle of Paris, who were not Catholic at all. Huh? But anyway, it was a kind of, friendship, collaboration. It worked very well. So my missionary collects a lot of information. He provides the time, the duration, the kind of damage, and so on. We can do what? But we can use official scale of intensity, like the European seismological scale of 1998, and we can have an idea of the intensity of past events, for which we don't have instrumental data. But from the description, material description of the damage, we can use this kind of information for assessing the intensity of the event. Yeah. So we use what? We study climate in the long durée. I don't want to be too long because once again, it's 10 minutes, if I'm right. Here is the example of the ANR Ophélie. We build very long series of grape harvest day. My colleagues are using models. I think about Nicolas Delis, for example. They could use this data and rebuild the average temperature from the end of the 14th century to the middle of the 19th century. But historical touch, I would say, it would be interesting because the historian could discriminate the true meteorological date from the anthropic date. by using other documents around the registers of grape harvest dates. I mean, I could see when they decided, for example, to harvest because of an epidemic, a pest, mostly the plague, or because of wars, the arrival of troops from Germany, from Sweden. They were awful, these guys, in the 17th century. So that's very interesting. And what we did, in addition, by these dots, red dots and black dots. For the kind of production, it's about extreme. It's easier to us, historians, to study past extreme than past fluctuation. Because our document, and I think you understand it now, they are very interesting how witnesses by this kind of disaster, because it kills many people, because it's quite an issue in terms of economic issues and so on. So, I took part in different projects about droughts in Europe. We published a lot. We could, for example, have an idea of the return periods of droughts since the 16th century to the 20th century. It was an opportunity to work with EDF, ERSN as well. I don't know if there is another name now, a new name of ERSN. And with reinsurers, very, very interested in what? In the famous area. Maybe you've been told about the area. It's another issue for insurers because of the drought, the heat waves, and so on. There is a kind of shrinkage, swelling of clay soil, and it's very costly. Another one with by the Kedar ANR team, we rebuilt the effects of the Laki volcano, and we published. We did the same, but with British colleagues and reinsurers about cyclone in the Caribs, yes, and in Indian Ocean as well. To have a wonderful example of a report from a governor, British or French one, from Mauritius Island and La Réunion, and they describe regularly the effects caused by cyclones. And ongoing project, the project Quasimodo. I have to work with Valérie, which is really a pleasure. It's a friend. It's like Nicolas, like Pascal. And we try to compare the dendrological data with historical data. So we try to see if it can match. So we use very old documents, parchment mostly, and we do that. It's the first step. And we had yesterday a meeting during 3 or 4 hours about it. And as you can see, Leslie, if the peak in terms of isotopic signal is confirmed by historical data and so on. And well, it works rather very well, actually. Yeah? But it's a very long work. More unexpected, we do that in Japan. I work on a project devoted to indigenous people in Siberia, sorry. And by working on a Russian document, I found a specific document talking in the 17th century about earthquake and then a tsunami in 1737. And by using the testimony of the Russian officer, of the Imperial Army, the 18th century, we can again rebuild the course of the earthquake and then of the tsunami. Then my colleagues from Tohoku and Kyoto University use their model, and they try to compare this earthquake, this tsunami, with, once again, the tsunami of 2011, of course. So that's very interesting. And by the way, if you're interested in indigenous people, they also say Well, actually, the locals, they are Kamchatek people. It's the name of the local indigenous people of Kamchatka. And actually, they immediately understood the risk of the earthquake. So they decided what? To live very quickly on the top of the hills and the mountains. And there were some Cossacks, Russian garrison, if you prefer. And the Cossacks were a bit amazed and a bit puzzled, and they decided to follow the indigenous people, and they saved their life. So, as you can see, it's a wonderful world we live, we historians. I think, it's not a pretension, but I think it could offer to you some opportunities in terms of collaboration. That said, I already work in the LSCE with several colleagues amongst you. But I think it was very important to you to have an idea of what I am using in terms of material, how we can manage some common methods. It's quite a challenge, but we do that regularly with climatologists and geologists, and how you could maybe integrate this historical social science side in your application when you apply for a French or international project. You have to know that European projects, they often demand social science side in a whole project. It's quite unusual. So if you need it, I'm here and ready, and my students as well. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. You have some questions? Merci.
That for instance, from the Middle East,
yep.
Do you or some of your colleagues work on even other documents from the antiquity period?
Yes, they can, but it's an issue actually because we have just a few documents written by Latin or Greek authors, philosophers, historians, and thinking about Strabon, for example, and so on. And we just have one testimony. By working on later periods, it's easier to cross different kind of sources. So on an ethic point of view level, I'm a bit embarrassed by using just antique sources. Or you can use them, but you have to cross them with, for example, all the data coming from archaeologists. Can be fine. But I'm working on Celtic people, and it's very interesting to see how they describe, for example, the Celts in Asia, it's Strabon and so on. And it seems to be a bit odd. While for the medieval and modern period, the modern period in history is a period between the 16th century and the beginning of the 19th century. It's typical historian vocabulary. And officially, I'm a modernist, but I'm not that modern, actually. Yes. Yes.
Yes, I have a question there.
Yeah.
Thank you. You deal with a great number of different languages and strange writing.
Yes. Yes.
And how do you manage to decipher this yourself? Do you learn the languages? How do you manage to, even sometimes it's faded away, so how do you get to recognize the signs?
As a politician, it's a very good question. Thank you for asking me about it. But yes, it's the most important issue to be able to read these old writings. It's what we call in history paleography. I didn't want to mention it because it takes a lot of time. But actually, yes, how do we learn it? In French, we learn it in universities, but for financial reasons, they don't teach paleography anymore in many universities. They did the same in Cambridge recently, 5 years ago. It was about 50 hours to give to the students, and they studied it was too expensive. So they closed the course. So it's very difficult. Actually, I have to train my students regularly, but you have to know that a student a normal student, even if he or she is not a historian, they can work on documents of the 18th and 19th century. It's not too complicated. Did you see the extract in English of the 18th century about the fence? It's very easy. It's very interesting. It's a wonderful calligraphy. It's a pleasure to read this. And for the medieval period in England, it's so easy. It's just in French. Yes. 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 It didn't please my colleagues of the Churchill College, but yes, it's the truth. They used the French until the 16th century, until the Protestant Reform. It's the same in Russia. If you work before the Bolshevik Revolution, you can use a lot of documents written or published in French. Yes, it was an international language. Yeah.
Do you use infographic means to enhance the colors or eliminate something when you've got illustrations from the back cover?
Yes, we do that sometimes because it's a necessity, particularly in Japan. Because most of the Japanese archives are private. And sometimes they use them, the paper, as a fence in the house, traditional house in Japan. And after the tsunami of 2011 with my colleagues from Sendai, so we had to bring back to the lab the famous, how do we say in French, cloison? Yes, cloison, because in cloison, sorry, I know the British name, the English name, we had some archives. Some of them dating from the 16th, 15th century sometimes. So we had to extract them from the panel and then to dry them because they were flood tsunami and so on. It was a very challenging project, yes. So we can use such techniques. Yeah, right, definitely.
Gilles?
Yes, I have a question. When we are doing modeling, so we model the global Earth, and I think when it was a revolution when Leroy-Ladurie makes its climate of the last millennium.
Yeah.
But I want to have your opinion. Some years ago, a paper was published, I think, in Nature Communication from the 2K group, which was interested in the last 2,000 years. So they use a lot of proxies, including historical, but also isotopic, all over the world. And it appears that the vision of Leroy-Ladurie was a bit biased because most of the sources he used was from Europe and China, and a little bit of China, I think, also East Asia, but not global. Yeah. So it seemed that what we learned at school from him about the date of the optimum medieval and little ice age was a bit biased by this. Yeah. So I think yes, it is really interesting to work together. But we always have to think that, as you said, our sciences are biased sometimes by number and estimates, but also, as you explained, historians are biased by the fact that they have to record the impact. So if they are not there,
yeah.
So do you think it's a big issue still, or?
I don't know. if there is an agreement when you decide to work all together, you say, well, we'll focus on one object. It's what we did for Ophélie and Cheddar, and it worked actually because we had data. We could use historical data in a hard science prospect, I would say. So it was, historian, I don't know, maybe he doesn't agree with me, Pascal. But to me, it was rather easy to work all together by trying to explain. But I remember the first document I brought back to Pascal. It was 6 minutes. And I remember your face. He was desperate, actually. He said that we can't do that. We can't use it. And while years after years, we could say we found a compromise. Yes, indeed. And it worked. It worked rather well. It works very well, for example, for Valérie, for Quasimodo project. I think we'll bring some very interesting stuff at the end of the project in terms of comparison or confirmation. For example, it's very interesting to Valérie. Actually, yes, she understands that some extreme events didn't have impacts on her isotopic peaks. I mean, if the extreme event occurred in winter, there is no trace in this data, of course. For example, or sometimes she has a peak. It's okay, a huge peak. It was the case yesterday, and we have no historical information. So it's because of the weakness of historical documents, or, and she's wondering now, it's about technical issues, about, I don't know, the samples and so on. So it's interesting in terms of, I would say, epistemology as well.
Moi, je suis de jury de thèse.
Bien sûr, merci.
Donc, s'il y a d'autres questions, il faut vous auto-organiser parce que je ne verrai pas les mains levées.
Alors, oui, allez-y.
It's kind of a question following up on the discussion you had just now. You think, like, for an example, over the last 1,000 years, like technology and kind of society has changed a lot. Do you think what we as a society perceive as extreme and how kind of things are described are also kind of biased by, you know, technology and things like that?
In terms of perception, actually, what they perceive in the past is the damage, the impact. Nowadays, it's not just the impact. I mean, for insurers, yes, it's very important. But for scientists, hard scientists, they are looking about the extreme, about the average, and so on. It's why they call it extreme, actually. So we don't have the same perspective, I would say. And we didn't have the same in the past until the 19th century and the scientific revolution of the 18th and 19th century. They were interested just in harvest. In terms of social rebellions, revolts, and the climate had a major role to play in some revolution, in some wars, undoubtedly. So it's very difficult to compare. We don't have the same data. We have a lot of instrumental data, quite different in the past. Once again, what we measure with historians is the social impact of events. So it's a weakness, I know, but it can be useful. I didn't want to tell you history is the panacea, the solution of all of our issues and so on. It's just a mean. You can use in addition of many other means. Just one. But very interesting in terms of what content, in terms of social side, I would say you can integrate in your work some anthropological, sociological information, and that's very interesting. And once again, because I'm aware of the content of the new call of the European Commission, the social science dimension is very important. If you can put just a small group, a small package in a European or international package, can you imagine the MIT was interested in my work? It's amazing. But well, it was my colleague McGee, and he said, yes, I'm very interested in the Lucky, so we need such. And it was an assess when they applied for the MIT to the funding. So think about it. Can be a good idea. Yeah?
Yeah, I have a last question. Yeah.
Yeah. Oui.
Can you go back to the Lucky eruption? Please. I was wondering, is that the eruption that was accused of fostering or aggravating the tensions before the French Revolution? I was wondering how many years it lasted, the impact lasted over England and France.
It's like the tombola. It's the same, actually. I'm sorry. Not well trained. Yeah. Here is the Lucky. Yeah. Actually, the Lucky erupted in June 17, 1883. Okay, and during the summer of 1783, we people saw fox everywhere in Europe, but of course not at the same time. And by using the archives of the French Society of Medicine, for example, the German Society of Mannheim, and the same from the Royal Society of London, we could map this information. And that way, we could have an idea, a very detailed idea, actually, of the move of the fog from the volcano Laki, located in Iceland, to Europe. And actually, by using the documents of the Royal Society of Medicine of Paris, they had correspondence in Persia, in Arabia, in North America, and actually they saw the fog as well, but again, not at the same time. So we have what I call the first effect, the fog. And people, the locals, they say, well, it's very smelly, it smells, how do we say, sulfur actually, œuf pourri, they say in the testimonies. And in the Royal Society of Science, the current National Society of Science in Paris, they were a bit scared by the fog and decided to put some meat on kites. And they used them in the sky of Paris. They took back the meat and they said, wow, that's very impressive and very scary. The meat is all corrupted. It's the expression of the text. Okay, so immediately they understood it was very dangerous. So they provided the authorities, royal and the city authorities, provided some advice in terms of what? They said, well, it's better not to go away. It's better not to go to the street. Maybe you should wear a mask. Reminds you maybe something. Huh? And they did it, yes. Then we had the second effect of the Laki volcano. You asked me about the duration. I'm right. Huh? The second effect was a very, very cold winter, starting in December, after a very hot autumn, actually. Yeah? And suddenly we had a lot of snow everywhere in Europe. For information, Normandy, they had about, in the area of Caen, they had about 1 meter of snow. Okay, so the whole Europe was covered by snow everywhere. And suddenly we are in December, January, and in February, suddenly we had a kind of heat in January, very early, and the snow melted, and then they faced disastrous floods everywhere in Europe. And by using the press, did you remember? You saw the newspaper, the Vienna Zeitung, Le Journal de Paris, and so on, and the Cambridge Chronicle. This newspaper provide a lot of information, and once again, we can map the move and the duration of the floods. It's just amazing for Vienna, for the whole of Europe. I stopped in Poland because I didn't have Russian colleagues to work on it at that time. So we did our best. It was a European project led by Christian Pfister. Yeah. For the Tambora, it's the same. For Tambora, it was a kind of pollution.
Tambora, what is it?
Tambora, yes.
What is it?
Tambora, sorry, yes. The Tambora volcano, it's quite an issue in European history. It was during the Waterloo Battle, actually, yes. In June, again, 1815, and it erupted in Indonesia. And I remember Pascal told me, well, if it's in Indonesia, it didn't affect Europe. But actually, it affected Europe, actually, because the pollution gave a kind of very deep fog in Europe and a lot of rain, very heavy rain during the summer of 1816. Did you read the famous writings of Lord Byron, and Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, of course.
Yeah.
You know the context.
Yeah.
Huh? They met on the lake of Bienne or Le Mans, I don't remember. Mary Shelley was desperate because it was raining too much. And Byron was very wealthy, and he said, well, if you want, I can welcome you in my villa. I rented in Geneva on the bank of the lake. So they stayed, because of the rain, in the villa of Byron. And they decided to organize a kind of game by writing the most disastrous writing about the meteorological context. So Mary Shelley wrote the Frankenstein book, and Byron wrote what? The famous Darkness poem. You didn't read it? So actually, it's directly influenced by the weather of the time. So anyway, actually, I said it affected Europe because of the rain, and the others were just disastrous in August and September 1816. So disastrous that a large part of European people suffered famine. Italy, Central Europe, the Germanic world, I mean Luxembourg, Austria, Germany, Belgium as well, the Netherlands, and everywhere, because of this famine, they faced revolts, but very strong revolts. So the European government, they didn't know how to behave, what to do with these people. So actually, the French did well. It was a new king after the Napoleonic Wars, Louis XVIII, and he sent military ships to Crimea, or Crimea, if you prefer, in order to bring back wheat for the French market. And by the Black Sea, they came to the Mediterranean Sea, and then they delivered the wheat from Marseille to the Rhone Valley. And that way, we French didn't suffer too much of the Tambora effect. For the other ones, for the states, or they were dukedoms in the case of Germany at that time, actually, what did they do? They favored what? Migration. They had deals with Brazilian, Argentinian governments, with the US federal government. Yes, they were sent as colonists in Indiana. I don't remember the name, but there were several US states colonized by these poor people dying in Germany, Belgium, and so on. And for Brasilia, maybe you know, Brasilia, Argentina, I'm always amazed when I meet in some village, kind of German villages. They look like German villages, and they dress for some festivals in German with the leather short and so on. And actually, they are the descendants of these volcanic meteorologist migrants. I told you, right? It's really amazing. It's okay? Yeah. Yeah. You try for a long
How
time.
do you select your archives? Like, do you already think that, for example, with the Comédie Française, did you think you could find some kind
Not at all. Actually, it's a US colleague. He was working on the cultural side of the archive, and he told me, well, I saw some stuff about meteorology. So would you like to work on it and so on? And I said, yes. But usually, yes. I wasn't born yesterday, so I have some experience in terms of archives. I know, and I try to train my students in this prospect. I learn I told them how they can find easily information depending on the topic and so on. So you can win a lot of time, actually. But we have archives everywhere. In China, it's an issue. Why? For historical reasons again, because of the communist revolution, and particularly because of the cultural revolution, they destroyed a lot of the archive.
That's why my ecologists working on the panda, for example, the great giant, the giant panda, or the kind of monkey, very, it's a national symbol, the Clinopithecus de Bietis, it's a monkey living in the mountain of Yunnan. They need French archives because they know they were in the past French missionaries there. And as you know, from now on, our missionaries were very well educated and they work as kind of subcontractors with the scientists of the Museum of Histoire Naturelle of Paris. Yeah. There is a lot of instinct in this kind of work. That's true. So it's not very hard science. Yeah.
Large forest fires are one of the most important climate-related impacts. So I was wondering whether you find archives for this type of event.
We have many archives about wildfires everywhere. In Australia, I found some for some Australian colleagues. We have a lot of information in Canada for you. And I was amazed. 5 years ago, I was working with Rimouski University, and I found a very voluminous report about the frequency of wildfire in Quebec and in the province of Ontario, and so on. It's very well recorded because these wildfires could last for weeks, sometimes for months. Has it happened in Siberia in 2008 and 11? I have a good memory. So yes, it's very easy to find information. Yes, and in Australia, I use testimonies of the locals, I mean Aboriginal people. That's very interesting. They don't have written archives, but they can talk about the past. And they can talk about, for example, about wildfire, about the tsunami as well.
Even with time information?
No. That's a witness. No, that's true. But I remember what we call a coutumier, an ancien chief. It's not really a chief. How to say in English? An ancien, I don't know.
Elder?
Well,
Elder?
Yes, an elder. Okay, yeah, an elder. And talk to me about a tsunami a long time ago, he said, coming from Tasmania to the Blue Mountains. There was a kind of narrative, yes, the locals, original, decided to fire, yes, a giant guy. The giant went to Tasmania and suddenly ran back to the Blue Mountain, saying, well, there is a way behind, there is a way. You have to reach the top of the mountain. So they still knew in case of tsunami, they had to get the top of the mountain. Then I met some Australian geologists and I talked to them about this kind of narrative. And they said it's true, it happened. Like it happened, I don't want to remember, it was maybe 4,000 to 5,000 ago, I don't know. But they said yes. I do the same in South America, in the Amazonia. It's very interesting. They have a very long memory of past events. Can say many things. I've been sent by the INSHS for working on the perception of erosion and of about sea surge in the delta of the Maroni River. So it was a kind of sacred mission. I wanted to save the locals from the erosion and so on. And I was very surprised because actually the local, they knew the erosion for a long time, the sea surge as well. And they told me what, after dozens of interviews, of course. They said, well, it's not an issue, huh? Don't worry, my guy. No, don't worry, we are used to move every day. And they are right, actually. They are nomadic people. It's the French governors who decided to settle them in some territories. And the Dutch did the same on the Suriname side and so on. But actually, they were used to move when they had to cope with erosion or sea surge. It was very easy. And they bring me with a boat in the sea, and they said, well, at about 200 meters from the beach, and they said, well, here is an ancient village. And regularly, I was with elders and shamans as well. And they prayed and they did some specific ceremony with me because it was just at the top of the village. So I do love this kind of, operational results. Yes. It's my SHS side. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry. It's a great adventure, you know. Science is a great adventure. Good luck at that story. Merci. Je vous en prie. Merci.